This is how to seal an acrylic painting using Liquitex matte varnish from someone who's made almost every mistake imaginable. So you don't have to. Not part of the varnishing process, but this canvas is slightly loose, so I'll tighten it by applying gesso on the back and letting it dry. I used matte medium for masking parts of this painting, and it left some uneven shininess, especially around the moon, and we'll see at the end if matte varnish evens it out. I also want to see what happens to the shine of the metallic paints. Make sure the painting is fully dry before varnishing. It's usually not a problem with acrylic paints, they tend to dry fast, but maybe if you use the medium that slows down the drying time. Dust off the painting first and do not shake the varnish bottle, it will just create bubbles. Instead, tilt it back and forth a few times to stir it. Do not pour the varnish directly on the canvas. I like to use some kind of a lid to pour it on and to load the brush from. Speaking of which, you're not supposed to use a sponge brush for this Liquitex varnish, which I have and didn't notice any problem with. And no paint rollers either, just a big soft flat brush that you preferably don't use for any paint colors. Do not thin the Liquitex matte varnish with water. You can definitely thin some other varnishes with water, but not this one. And this is very fluid, so you probably wouldn't need to anyway. You can make a thin coat with this without diluting it. Do not varnish the painting vertically, but instead flat on the desk. Start from the top and work your way down for the first layer. If you notice you missed a spot, fight the urge to go back and get it. Get it on the second layer instead. I'm also sealing the sides of the canvas because I paint them too. And then let it dry for at least 3 hours between coats. From my experience, this varnish at least visually dries very fast though. I've never done this before, but since dust particles from the air might stick to the wet canvas, it's recommended to dry the painting inside a plastic film tent. So I tried setting that up with some glass jars and a plastic bag and propping the canvas up so it doesn't stick to the desk pad underneath. They recommend only 2 coats, so on the second coat I'm applying the varnish the other way from side to side, trying to make sure I catch everything and redo the edges of the canvas as well. You don't need an isolation coat of matte medium or some other painting medium before this varnish, because this is a permanent, non-removable varnish, so you can't remove it anyway. And an isolation coat is usually done to prevent the paint from reactivating if you remove the varnish one day to restore and re-varnish the painting. It's best to use gloves while varnishing and ventilate the area during and after. This varnish actually doesn't smell bad, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely non-toxic either. And wash the brush after applying each coat or it's going to turn rock solid once it dries. I let it dry overnight and this is how it turned out. It's difficult to show on camera, but in person I can see it did even out the shininess of the matte medium around the moon. The paint layers are a little thicker there, but there isn't a clear difference in shininess anymore. The gold metallic parts, on the other hand, still appear a little shinier than the rest of the painting, but not as shiny as before, so I think those parts could still be varnished with a gloss varnish and a small brush on top of the matte varnish. I just don't have a gloss varnish right now. But what if you notice a mistake and want to fix it? Can you paint over the varnish? I go through some varnishing problems and solutions in this video. See you there!